The heavy, ornate doors of the chapel felt like the gateway to a prison. Helen stood before them, her slender frame trembling beneath the weight of a wedding gown she had never wanted. The silk and lace were a cruel joke, a beautiful wrapping for a life being sold away. Her family, desperate for protection and favor, had given her to a legend, a monster whispered about in fearful tones. Antonello, the most feared man in Italy. He was not a man, people said, but a storm of violence and power, and she was the price for a truce she didn't understand. A cold, firm hand on her elbow jerked her from her thoughts. Her uncle, his face a mask of grim necessity, pushed the doors open. "Courage, girl," he muttered, his voice offering no comfort. "Your life is for the family now." The walk down the aisle was a blur of silent, grim-faced strangers. There were no smiles, no joyful tears. This was not a celebration, it was a transaction. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and unspoken fear. Helen kept her eyes down, focusing on the cold marble floor, each step feeling like a march to the gallows. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a gilded cage. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, but one gaze, from the front of the chapel, felt heavier than all the others combined. It was a physical pressure, a dark heat that made the fine hairs on her arms stand up. Forcing her chin up, she finally looked at him. And the world stopped. Antonello was not the gnarled, ugly beast her nightmares had conjured. He was beautiful. The word felt wrong, too soft for the sheer intensity of him, but it was the only one that fit. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his form encased in a perfectly tailored black suit that screamed of power and money. His hair was as dark as a starless midnight, brushed back from a strong, commanding forehead. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the color of dark roasted coffee, deep and unreadable, and they were fixed on her with an unnerving, absolute focus. He didn't look at her dress or her face. He looked into her as if he were already stripping away the layers of silk and fear to see the very core of her soul. He was devastating. And he was terrifying. He didn't smile. He didn't move. He simply watched her approach, a king observing a new subject brought before his throne. As she drew closer, she could see the sharp, clean line of his jaw, the faint shadow of stubble, the surprising fullness of his lips. He was all hard lines and simmering energy, a predator holding himself perfectly still. Her uncle placed her cold, trembling hand into Antonello's. The moment their skin touched, a jolt, sharp and electric, shot up her arm. It wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming, a surge of heat that was entirely at odds with the ice in her veins. His hand was large, his fingers long and strong, completely enveloping hers. She felt the surprising roughness of his palm, a testament to a life that was not soft, and the warmth of his skin seemed to seep directly into her bones. He felt her flinch. His dark eyes narrowed just a fraction, and his grip tightened, not enough to hurt, but enough to stop her from pulling away. It was a possessive hold, a claiming. The priest began the ceremony, his voice a dry, droning hum in the vast, tense silence of the chapel. Helen heard none of it. Her entire world had shrunk to the point where her hand was joined with his. She could feel the steady, powerful thrum of his pulse against her skin, a slow, confident rhythm that was the complete opposite of her own frantic heartbeat. He was calm. He was in control. And he was now the center of her universe. When it was time to say her vows, her voice was a faint, shaky whisper. "I do." The words felt like a betrayal of herself. Antonello's voice, when he spoke his vows, was different. It was a low, deep baritone that vibrated through the very air, resonant and commanding. It was a voice used to being obeyed, a voice that promised both protection and punishment. "I do," he said, and the words were not a promise, but a decree. His eyes never left hers, pinning her in place. The priest pronounced them man and wife. A tense, collective sigh seemed to ripple through the crowd. It was over. She was his. Antonello turned to her fully for the first time. He was even more imposing up close, his height forcing her to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. The air around them crackled with a strange, new energy. He reached out, his movements slow and deliberate, and his free hand came up to cradle her cheek. His thumb, rough and warm, stroked once, gently, over her cheekbone, wiping away a tear she hadn't even realized had fallen. The gesture was so unexpectedly tender that it stole her breath. For a single, wild moment, she saw something flicker in the depths of his dark eyes, not cruelty, but a fierce, possessive curiosity. Then he leaned in. Her eyes fluttered shut, her body tensing for the cold, formal kiss she expected. His lips did not meet hers. Instead, he bent his head, and his mouth brushed against her ear. His warm breath ghosted over her sensitive skin, sending a shiver cascading down her spine that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with a strange, thrilling panic. His whisper was for her alone, a low, intimate rumble that felt like a physical caress. "You are my wife now." He paused, letting the weight of those words sink into her soul. Helen stood frozen, her heart pounding a frantic, chaotic rhythm against his chest. The scent of him, clean soap and something darker, something uniquely male and dangerous, filled her senses. Then he finished, his voice dropping even lower, laced with a dark, sensual promise that made her knees feel weak. "You belong with me." He pulled back, his dark eyes blazing with a heat that promised a storm was coming. A storm of what? She didn't know. But as he tucked her hand firmly into the crook of his arm, his body a solid, unyielding wall of heat beside her, Helen knew one thing for certain. Her old life was gone. And the terrifying, beautiful man beside her was about to become her whole world. The walk back down the aisle felt infinitely longer, the eyes of the crowd now filled with a new, knowing respect. She was no longer just Helen. She was Antonello's wife. And the promise in his whisper hung in the air between them, a cliffhanger leaving her breathless, terrified, and dangerously, inexplicably intrigued. The massive stone house was more a fortress than a home, its echoing hallways and silent rooms a constant reminder of her new cage. For days, Helen and Antonello existed as polite strangers orbiting the same space. He was a ghost in his own home, leaving before dawn and returning long after she had retreated to the separate bedroom she'd been given. Their interactions were brief, functional. A nod across the dinner table. A low, good night, as they parted ways in the grand hallway. He was always watching her with that same intense focus, but he kept his distance, a predator studying his new possession, deciding what to do with her. The first crack in the ice came on a rainy afternoon. Helen, trying to find a sliver of comfort, had curled up in the library with a book. She'd absent-mindedly mentioned to a housekeeper that she found the room chilly. The next day, a beautiful, intricately woven cashmere blanket was draped over the back of her favorite armchair. There was no note, but she knew. He had noticed. Another evening, she had pushed the food around her plate, her appetite stolen by loneliness. Antonello, from the head of the long table, had watched her in silence. The following night, the cook served a simple pasta dish, a recipe from the region where Helen had grown up. It was a taste of home, a small, stunning kindness that brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She looked up and found his gaze on her. He gave a single, slow nod. He saw her. He was listening. Slowly, the fortress began to feel less like a prison. The fear that had coiled in her stomach started to loosen, replaced by a nervous, fluttering curiosity. The man who commanded armies of shadows with a single word was also the man who ensured her favorite tea was always in the pantry. The turning point came one quiet evening. A sudden, violent summer storm lashed against the windows, the thunder so loud it shook the very foundations of the house. Helen, who had always been secretly frightened of storms, jumped at a particularly deafening crack of thunder, her book clattering to the floor. She didn't hear him approach. A shadow fell over her, and she looked up to find Antonello standing there. He wasn't in one of his sharp, intimidating suits. He wore a simple dark sweater and trousers, and he looked younger, more approachable. "The storm is fierce," he said, his voice a low rumble that rivaled the thunder. Helen could only nod, her heart still racing. He didn't leave. Instead, he bent down, picked up her book, and then, to her astonishment, sat in the large armchair opposite her. He didn't try to fill the silence with empty words. He simply sat, a solid, calm presence in the heart of the chaos outside. With him there, the thunder suddenly seemed less frightening. "You are not like what I expected," she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. His dark eyes met hers. "And what did you expect, Helen?" "A monster," she said honestly, her voice trembling. "They all say you are a monster." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The world needs monsters," he replied softly, "to keep the other monsters away." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze intent. "But I am not a monster to you. I will never be a monster to you." In that moment, something inside her shifted, broke open, and melted completely. The last of her fear evaporated, burned away by the raw, honest intensity in his eyes. The fluttering in her chest wasn't panic anymore. It was something else, something warmer and more terrifying. It was hope. It was a pull. That night, when she went to her bedroom, she didn't close the door. She stood in the center of the room, her heart pounding a new, excited rhythm. The house was silent, the storm having passed, leaving a calm, charged air in its wake. She heard his footsteps in the hallway. They paused at her door. She held her breath. Antonello stood in the doorway, his large frame filling the space. The dim light from the hall cast shadows across the sharp planes of his face. His eyes were dark, burning with a heat she now recognized, a heat that mirrored the new fire in her own blood. "Helen," he said, her name a prayer on his lips. She didn't speak. She simply looked at him, her eyes wide and unblinking, and took one small step back, an unspoken invitation. That was all he needed. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, but his movement was not one of attack. It was one of purpose. He came to a stop before her, so close she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could smell the clean, spicy scent of his skin. "This changes everything," he whispered, his voice husky. "There is no going back." "I know," she breathed. He reached out, his hands coming up to cradle her face. His touch was not the possessive grip from the wedding, but unbearably gentle, his thumbs stroking her cheeks as if she were the most precious, fragile thing he had ever held. And then he kissed her. It was not the cold, formal peck she had feared at the altar. It was a slow, deep, claiming kiss that stole the very breath from her lungs. It was a kiss that held all the intensity she had seen in his eyes, all the patience he had shown her, all the fierce, hidden tenderness. It was a storm of feeling, sweet, nervous, and overwhelmingly intense. Her hands came up, clutching the soft wool of his sweater, holding on as the world tilted on its axis. He was patient, so patient. His hands explored her with a reverence that made her want to weep. He learned the landscape of her body as if memorizing a sacred map, his touch sparking trails of fire across her skin. The nervousness she felt was met with whispered reassurance, the newness of it all handled with a care that shattered the last of her defenses. It was not a conquest. It was a discovery. A joining. Later, tangled in the sheets, wrapped in the safe, strong circle of his arms, Helen felt a peace she had never known. Her head rested on his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare back. He shifted, rolling so he was leaning over her, his body caging her in, but she felt no fear. Only a thrilling, powerful sense of belonging. He looked down at her, his dark eyes soft in the moonlight filtering through the window. The intensity was still there, but it was layered with a devotion so deep it stole her breath. He lowered his head, his lips brushing her ear, just as he had at their wedding. But this time, his whisper was not a cold statement of fact. It was a warm, sensual vow, a promise that seeped into her very soul. "I will claim every part of you tonight," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Not as a king claims his land, but as a man claims his heart. Every fear, every hope, every dream, every sigh, every whisper. They are all mine to cherish, now and forever." And as his lips found hers again, Helen knew it was true. The storm had passed, and in its wake, a forever love had begun to bloom. The great stone house was no longer a quiet, cold place. It was alive. After the night they became true husband and wife, everything changed. The silence was filled with the warm sound of their shared laughter and soft whispers. The fear that once clung to the walls had vanished, replaced by a new, thrilling feeling that warmed every room. Helen was a different person. The scared young woman was gone. Now, she walked through the grand hallways with her head held high. Her eyes, once wide with fright, now shone with a confident, happy light. She smiled easily, a real smile that started deep in her heart. She knew, without a doubt, that she was loved. This knowledge made her brave and strong. She began to make the massive house her own. She moved chairs to catch the morning sun. She filled empty vases with bright, bold flowers from the garden. She was no longer a guest or a prisoner. She was its queen, and Antonello was her king. Antonello was changed too. The hard, cold look in his eyes was now soft and warm whenever he looked at her. The man who made entire cities nervous was gentle only with his wife. He still left each day to do his important, powerful work. Men still jumped at his command. But when he returned home, he was just a man in love. His deep voice, which could sound so frightening, became a low, warm murmur just for her. His strong hands, which could command such danger, now held her with a tenderness that made her heart flutter. Their days settled into a new, happy rhythm. They ate breakfast together every morning at a small table in the garden. He would watch her as she talked about her dreams, a small smile playing on his lips. He started to ask for her thoughts on his business. Her clever, different way of seeing things surprised and pleased him. She was not just his wife, she was becoming his partner. One afternoon, he came home early and found her in the music room, lightly touching the keys of a grand piano that no one ever played. "Can you play?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. She shook her head, a little shy. "No. I always wished I could." He walked over and took her hand. "Then I will have a teacher come tomorrow." He said it simply, as if granting her every wish was the most natural thing in the world. Then he led her to the piano bench and sat beside her. He took her finger and pressed it down on a single key. A clear, sweet note hung in the air. "There," he said, his voice a whisper in her ear. "Now the first music in this house is ours." Their nights belonged only to each other. The long, formal dining table was forgotten. They often ate simple meals on a soft rug in front of the big fireplace. They would talk for hours, or sometimes, just sit in a comfortable silence, her head resting in his lap while his fingers gently stroked her hair. The dangerous world outside felt a million miles away. One evening he found her in the library, looking at a book of maps. "Is there a place you dream of?" he asked, coming to stand behind her, his hands settling on her waist. She leaned back against his solid chest, feeling his warmth through her dress. "Everywhere," she whispered. "With you." He turned her around to face him. His dark eyes were intense and serious. "Then we will go everywhere." He kissed her then, a slow, deep kiss that promised endless adventures. His hands slid down her back, pulling her closer until not a sliver of space remained between them. She could feel the hard, unyielding strength of his body, a contrast to the softness of her own. The kiss grew hotter, more demanding, stealing the breath from her lungs. He broke away, his breath a warm gust against her cheek. "But first," he murmured, his voice husky with want, "I need to show you something upstairs." He took her hand and led her from the room. But they didn't go to the bedroom. He led her to a private sitting room she rarely visited. The lights were dim. He didn't speak. He simply turned her to face the wall, his large, powerful body pressing against her from behind. His lips found the sensitive spot where her neck met her shoulder, making her gasp and her knees feel weak. His hands were on her hips, his touch firm and sure. "This is mine," he whispered against her skin, his fingers moving to slowly unbutton her dress. "All of this is mine to love and to protect." The fabric pooled softly at her feet. The cool air touched her skin, raising goosebumps, but his body was a furnace of heat behind her. His hands began a slow, deliberate exploration, rediscovering every curve, every secret place, his touch setting her nerves on fire. It was intense and slow, a masterful claiming that was not about possession, but about worship. He was reminding her, without words, that she was his in every way that mattered. It left her breathless, trembling, and utterly consumed in his arms. Later, tangled in the silk sheets of their bed, she traced the hard lines of his muscles with her fingertip. He watched her, his eyes dark and full of a quiet awe. "Do you ever think about our wedding day?" she asked softly, her hand resting over the steady beat of his heart. His arm tightened around her, pulling her closer. "I think of it every day," he said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. "I remember how cold your hand was in mine. I remember the terror in your beautiful eyes, a look that hurt me more than any enemy ever could. Being the source of your fear is my greatest regret." She lifted her head to look at him, her own eyes soft. "That fear led me to you. It led me to this," she said, gesturing to the space between them in their warm bed. "Our strange beginning just makes our forever feel more earned. It makes it real and strong." He rolled over, pinning her gently beneath him, his weight a familiar and welcome comfort. The moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating the fierce devotion on his face. "Helen," he said, her name sounding like a sacred vow on his lips. "You are my life. My heart beats only for you." He lowered his head, his mouth hovering just above hers, sharing the same air. "I will spend every single day I have left on this earth making sure you are happy. I will burn the world to the ground to keep you safe. You are protected here. You are adored here." His hand moved to her stomach, resting there with a strange, new sense of promise. "This is only the beginning of our forever." Then he kissed her, and it was a kiss that sealed every promise he had ever made. It was a kiss that held their painful past, their joyful present, and a future so bright it almost blinded them. The scared girl and the feared Mafia king were gone, their shadows lost in the moonlight. In their place was a man and a woman, bound by a deep, passionate love, ready to face every tomorrow together. Their forever was not a distant dream. It was here, in this room, in the way their bodies fit together perfectly. It was a forever that had just begun, and it was more powerful than any fear, and stronger than any enemy. Did Antonello and Helen's passionate journey from a cold marriage to a burning love capture your heart? If you crave more stories where intense romance and steamy connections conquer all, then you need to join our community. Subscribe to the channel now so you never miss a tale that will make your heart race. We want to hear from you. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from and which passionate moment made you blush the most. Your thoughts inspire all of our stories,